The coffee maker finished its cycle at 6:47 every morning, and I knew it by sound before I ever opened my eyes. That small, reliable hiss and pop had been the opening note of my days for 11 years. In the early years of our marriage, Claire used to beat me to the kitchen, and I'd come downstairs to find her already at the counter, barefoot, hair loose, hands wrapped around a mug like it was something precious. Those mornings felt effortless, not romantic in any theatrical sense, just easy in the way only genuine comfort between two people can be. By the time Owen turned 8, our mornings had settled into a different kind of rhythm. Efficient, choreographed. She packed his lunch while I made breakfast. I drove him to school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She handled the rest. We divided tasks the way long-married couples do, not out of resentment, but out of a quiet logic that had built itself up over years without either of us really designing it. I was a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm out of Columbus that kept a satellite office in Greenfield. Bridges, load-bearing assessments, foundation work. I spent my days thinking about the invisible architecture that held things up, the things people walked over without ever wondering what kept them from falling. There was something I used to find satisfying about that. A kind of professional dignity in being the person who made sure everything stayed in place. Claire coordinated events, corporate conferences, charity galas, the occasional wedding. She was good at it in the way that naturally social people are good at things that require managing other people's expectations. She read rooms well. She knew how to make others feel seen. I had always admired that about her, even in the years when I felt like she was deploying that skill everywhere except at home. That thought, I want to be careful about it, even now, because it would be easy to look back and reshape the story into something that was already broken before any of this happened. It wasn't. Or at least, I didn't believe it was. Jess had been Claire's closest friend since college. The kind of friendship that predates you, that has its own history and language and set of references you'll never fully access. I'd always accepted that without much bother. Jess was warm, easy to be around, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and asked real follow-up questions. Her husband Marcus had come into the picture about 6 years back. They'd met through mutual friends, married quickly, no kids. He was a financial advisor, polished in the way that made some men seem trustworthy and others seem performing. I had never quite decided which category he fell into, but I hadn't thought about it much either. The four of us had dinner together maybe once a month, sometimes more during the warmer months when Marcus liked to barbecue on their back deck. Claire and Jess talked constantly, texts throughout the day, lunch when their schedules lined up. Marcus and I were friendly in the comfortable, undemanding way of men who have no particular reason not to be. I didn't see anything. That's what I keep coming back to. Not a flicker. Not a single misread moment that, in hindsight, I could point to and say, there, that was the first crack. There was one evening in late October. We'd had dinner at their place, and at some point late in the night, when Jess and I were clearing the table, I glanced through the kitchen window into the backyard and saw Claire and Marcus standing near the fire pit. They weren't touching. They weren't leaning in. They were just talking, quietly, the way you talk when the night has turned cold and the wine has gone warm. Claire was laughing at something he'd said, a real laugh, not her social laugh, the one I knew from 11 years of watching her face in every kind of light. I remember thinking, she seems happy tonight, and I went back to stacking dishes. I was a man who believed his marriage was solid the way I believed in load-bearing walls, not because I tested them constantly, but because I'd built them and I knew their composition. That confidence was the first thing I would lose. Owen had a school project due that week, something about weather patterns, and he'd asked me to help him build a model out of cardboard and paint. We'd been working on it in stages, and that Thursday night I sat with him at the kitchen table while Claire was out at what she called a venue walkthrough for an upcoming corporate event. Owen talked about cloud formations with a focused intensity that made me quietly proud. He had a way of locking onto a subject and treating it as the most important thing in the world, which I recognized as something he'd gotten from me. "Dad," he said, pressing down a piece of tape without looking up. "Is Marcus Uncle Marcus or just Marcus?" "Just Marcus," I said. "He's not family. Mom calls him her person." I kept my eyes on the cardboard. "What do you mean?" She said it on the phone. She was in the car, and I was in the back, and she didn't know I was listening. She said, "He screwed up his face trying to remember. He just gets it. He's my person." I was quiet for a moment. "She probably meant Jess," I said. "Jess is her person." He shrugged and went back to the tape. I told myself I believed what I'd just said. But something had tightened, low and quiet, somewhere I didn't want to examine yet. The call came 11 days later. I used to think deception required enormous effort, some sustained, exhausting performance, the kind that eventually collapses under its own weight. What I didn't understand, before all this, was how naturally it fits into the texture of an ordinary life. How little it actually disturbs the surface. Claire left for work every morning at the same time. She came home tired and distracted in the comfortable way of someone whose job required her to carry other people's logistics all day. She kissed me on the cheek in the kitchen. She asked how the project review had gone. She sat with Owen while he read before bed, and then came downstairs and folded herself onto the couch with her phone, scrolling through something she never volunteered to explain. That last part, I want to be honest, that had always been true. Claire had always kept a certain interior distance. I had never tried to close it by force. I thought of it as her autonomy, her right to an inner life I didn't need access to. I was a person who valued the same for myself. What I hadn't asked, what I carefully avoided asking, was whether that distance was getting wider. Her phone had become something slightly different in the past few months. Not dramatically. She hadn't started hiding it, hadn't started turning it face down. But she'd begun taking it upstairs when she showered, texting in a way that had a different quality of focus. Not the absent scrolling I recognized, but the closed, slightly tilted concentration of someone composing something specific. I noticed and then unnoticed it. That was my preferred technique, I've come to understand. Notice, then find an explanation, then file the explanation as settled. The venue walkthroughs had increased. She'd always had evening obligations for her work. It was the nature of the industry, but there had been a shift somewhere in September or October that brought them closer together. Twice a week some weeks. She was professional about it, always told me in advance, always home by 10. I never once called the venues to confirm. Jess called the house phone one afternoon, something she almost never did, and when I answered, there was a pause before she said my name that felt longer than it should have. "Is Claire home?" she asked. "She's at the gym," I said. "Want me to have her call you?" "No," she said, too quickly. Then, "No, it's fine. I'll text her." I stood with the phone in my hand for a moment after she hung up. Jess was a woman who talked easily, who filled silence without effort. That pause had been something else, a hesitation that had texture to it. I filed it away. The school teacher called that same week, Mrs. Holloway, Owen's third-grade teacher, to mention that Owen had been unusually quiet the past few weeks and had written a story in class about a boy whose family moved to a new house because things got too loud. She wasn't alarmed, she said. Just wanted us to know. Children often process things through writing that they don't have words for yet. I asked Claire about it that evening. She said Owen was probably just picking up on work stress. He was a sensitive kid. She'd talked to him. Her answer was immediate and smooth in a way that left no room for further entry. And I accepted it because the alternative required a kind of confrontation I wasn't ready to name. Looking back, and I've done a great deal of looking back, that teacher's call was the first true red flag I consciously received and consciously ignored. Owen hadn't been picking up on work stress. He'd been picking up on something specific, something with a shape, something his mother was carrying into the house every evening without setting it down. I didn't want to see it. I was afraid, not of losing her exactly, not yet, but of losing the version of my life I had built my entire adult identity around. The stable home, the reliable marriage, the father who had gotten it right. There is a particular kind of cowardice that disguises itself as patience, and I was expert at it. Marcus came up twice in conversation that week in ways I now recognize as significant. Once when Claire mentioned offhandedly that he'd recommended a financial app she was thinking about downloading. Once when Owen, at dinner, said Marcus had shown him a card trick at their last visit and he wanted to learn it. Claire smiled when he said that, a specific smile that went somewhere private before she covered it. I said nothing both times. The thing about engineers is that we're trained to look for failure modes, the theoretical scenarios where a structure comes apart. I was good at that professionally. Personally, I had built a perfect system for not looking. 11 days after Owen told me about the phone call he'd overheard, my own phone lit up on the nightstand at 2:14 in the morning. Jess's name on the screen. I answered on the second ring. She was crying before she spoke, not the soft kind, but the kind that has been held down for too long and has finally broken through. I sat up in the dark, and beside me, Claire slept without moving. Daniel. Her voice had a crushed quality to it. I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm because I can't. I can't keep this inside anymore. I moved off the bed quietly and went to the hallway, pulling the door behind me. Jess. I kept my voice low. Tell me. What she told me took 11 minutes. I know because I checked the call log afterward, unable to believe that something capable of dismantling the architecture of a decade could be compressed into 11 minutes. Marcus and Claire had been sleeping together since July. For months. Jess had found out 3 weeks ago. A hotel receipt she hadn't been meant to see, in a jacket she'd pulled from the closet by accident. She'd confronted Marcus, who had denied it, then confirmed it, then wept, then bargained. She had not told me because she'd been trying to save her own marriage first. She'd given Marcus an ultimatum. He had ended it, or told her he had. But she couldn't sleep, and she couldn't look at me when we all had dinner together the previous Saturday and watch me talk to Claire like everything was fine. I stood in the hallway of my own house in the dark, 11 feet from where my wife was sleeping, and I felt absolutely nothing for a long and terrifying moment. Then everything arrived at once, not as emotion, but as physical sensation. Heat in my hands, a ringing clarity behind my eyes. Does Claire know you're calling me? I asked. No. Okay. I breathed. Okay. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I should have. Don't. I wasn't sharp about it. Not tonight. I hung up and stood there for another minute. Then I went back into the bedroom. Claire was still asleep, lying on her side, her hair across the pillow exactly the way it had been for 11 years. I stood at the foot of the bed and looked at her. I had spent the past 11 years studying load-bearing structures. I knew exactly what happened when the foundational element was not what you believed it to be. I didn't wake her. I went downstairs, sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and spent the rest of the night doing what I should have done 2 months earlier. I looked. I stopped filing things away and I looked. I went through what I could access. Not her phone, which was upstairs, but the shared family calendar on the laptop. The venue walkthroughs. I cross-referenced dates. I thought about the financial app Marcus had recommended. About Owen in the back seat overhearing something a child shouldn't have overheard. About Jess's pause on the phone. About that fire pit evening in October and the specific quality of Claire's laugh. The strange thing about confirmation is that it doesn't feel like discovery. It feels like remembering something you already knew. By the time gray light began coming through the kitchen window, I had assembled no new facts. I hadn't needed to. What I had done was stop pretending that the structure was sound. Owen came downstairs at 7:15 in his pajamas, dragging his stuffed dog by one ear, and climbed into the chair across from me. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He looked at me with the particular seriousness of children who sense more than they're given credit for. "Are you okay, Dad?" "I'm working on it," I said. He nodded like that was a reasonable answer and asked if we had the kind of cereal with the marshmallows. I got up to check. I said nothing to Claire that morning. She came downstairs at her usual time, poured coffee, asked Owen about his spelling test, kissed me on the cheek at the counter. Her lipstick left its familiar pale mark on my jaw. I watched her move through the kitchen with the steady, functional ease of someone who did not know their world was about to change, and I felt something I hadn't expected, a cold, precise clarity. I had two choices. I could break open the morning right there, the coffee still hot, Owen eating his cereal with the focused dedication of an 8-year-old, and let everything detonate at once. Or I could wait, be certain of what I needed to be certain of. Do this right. I chose to wait, not out of weakness, out of a very specific understanding that what happened next would matter for a long time, and I needed to be standing on solid ground when it happened. That day at work I was useless. I sat at my desk and stared at structural diagrams without processing a single line. My colleague Pete stopped by my office twice and left both times without saying anything. He was the kind of man who read atmospheres accurately and respected them. I called Jess from my car during lunch. She answered immediately, her voice stripped of everything except exhaustion. We talked for 40 minutes. She gave me what she knew, dates that aligned, a name of a hotel, the Meridian, 30 miles from Greenfield, a partial confirmation from Marcus that it had been ongoing since a work dinner Claire had organized in July that Marcus had attended as a client guest. He said it started as texting, Jess said, that it was emotional for months before anything physical. She paused. I don't know if that's supposed to make it better or worse. It doesn't make it either, I said. I asked her one question I needed answered. Did Claire know you were going to call me? No. She doesn't know I know. I never confronted her directly. Her voice tightened. I confronted him. She doesn't know any of this is out. That information changed my approach entirely. Over the following 4 days, I moved carefully and quietly. I called the Meridian under a professional pretext. I'd occasionally booked client dinners through hotel event spaces, so I had standing, and confirmed that a reservation under Marcus's name had been made 3 times between August and October. I wasn't proud of the inquiry, but I needed the ground beneath me to be real. I also noticed things I had no longer been bothering to explain away. Claire's phone charging on the kitchen counter one evening while she was upstairs, the screen lighting up with a message preview from a contact saved as M Events. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. A parking stub in her coat pocket from a lot near the Meridian, dated in September. The way she laughed at something on her phone one night, and then caught herself and went deliberately neutral when she noticed me watching. Each thing I found did not feel like a wound. It felt like confirmation of a wound that had already been dealt. That distinction matters more than it sounds. There was a harder thing I had to sit with during those days, something that had nothing to do with evidence. I kept returning to what Owen had heard from the back seat of the car. He just gets it. He's my person. I turned that sentence over and over like a stone with an uneven edge. Because the thing that made it unbearable wasn't the implication of intimacy. It was the casualness of it, the ease. She had said that sentence without any apparent awareness of her son sitting 2 feet away, which meant she had grown so comfortable in this other life that her guard had stopped functioning. I had spent 11 years trying to be present for my wife in the ways I understood how to be present. I had not always been demonstrative. I had not always been exciting. I was steady, reliable, consistent, the things I had believed a marriage needed, the things I was built to provide. That week I began to understand that I had confused being a good structural element with being a good partner. They are not the same thing. The bridge stays up, but no one falls in love with a bridge. I sat with that realization alone, in the evenings after Owen was in bed, in the particular silence of a house where something irreversible was already true, even if no one had said it out loud yet. By Thursday, I knew enough. I knew more than I wanted to. The question was no longer what happened. The question was what now. I called my brother Kyle in Cincinnati. We talked for 2 hours. He didn't tell me what to do, which was the right thing not to do. He just stayed on the phone. Friday evening, after Owen was asleep, I sat down across from Claire in the living room and said her name. She looked up from her phone. Something in my face, the stillness, maybe, or the absence of the ambient expressions people make when their lives still feel normal, must have registered immediately because her posture changed before I said a word. Jess called me, I said, 11 days ago, 2 in the morning. The color left her face in a way that confirmed everything before any words moved between us. What followed was not a scene I will reconstruct in full, because some things lose their truth when they're translated into narrative. But the shape of it was this. She didn't deny it. Not after the first few seconds of reflex, when denial is still automatic. She set her phone face down on the couch cushion, that small gesture, deliberate and final, and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something more exposed than guilt. The look of someone who has been carrying something enormous and has just been relieved of it in the worst possible way. She said his name without me asking. She said July. She said it had started with long conversations at the kind of industry events where people let their guards down, and that it had grown into something she hadn't planned and hadn't known how to stop. I didn't plan it, she said. I need you to know that. I know, I said. And I did know. That wasn't the part that mattered. What I wanted to understand, what I asked, quietly, sitting across from her in a living room we'd furnished together, surrounded by 11 years of accumulated ordinary life, was whether she had ever intended to tell me. She was quiet for a long time. I told myself I was protecting you, she finally said. I remember the way the lamp on the side table threw a yellow cast across her face when she said that. I remember thinking, that sentence tells me more than anything else could have, because protecting me had not been the reason. She had been protecting the version of herself she wanted to maintain, the functional wife, the capable mother, the woman who hadn't detonated her family's life. She had been protecting her own story. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't need to. We talked for 3 hours. She told me things I had not known and some things I had suspected, and some things that added details I hadn't anticipated. Marcus had told her he loved her. She had not told him the same. She had tried to end it twice, once in September, once in early October, and had not followed through either time. She had known about Jess discovering it for the past 3 weeks and had been living in suspended terror ever since. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked again. "I don't know," she said. That was the most honest answer she gave me all night, and it was the one that did the most damage. I told her I needed her to stay in the guest room. She didn't argue. She went upstairs and came back down with her pillow and her phone charger, and she paused at the entrance to the hallway and looked at me like she wanted to say something that would help. There was nothing that would help. I sat in the living room alone after she was gone and listened to the house settle around me. Those small sounds of contraction and cooling that old structures make in the night. For a moment, I thought about the word forgiveness, about what it would cost, about whether I was capable of it. I wasn't sure yet, but I thought about it. And that night, I believed it might still be possible. I tried. I want that on the record, as clearly as I can state it. For 3 months after that conversation, I tried to do what people say is possible, to absorb the fact of what had happened, to stop equating the knowledge of it with the catastrophe itself, and to find something on the other side that was still worth staying for. We went to counseling. A therapist in Columbus named Dr. Reyes, who had a calm, measured way of sitting with difficult things without flinching from them. Claire attended every session. She was honest in them in a way that was sometimes more than I was prepared for. She acknowledged the specific nature of her choices, not just the affair, but the deliberate concealment, the months of maintained normalcy, while everything underneath was something else entirely. She talked about loneliness she hadn't known how to name, about a hunger for being understood that she had convinced herself she wasn't getting at home. I listened to all of it. I tried to take it into the part of me that was capable of understanding rather than the part that kept accounts. There were stretches of days, sometimes as long as a week, where I managed to inhabit the house without the constant low hum of it. I could sit across from her at dinner. I could help Owen with his homework in the same room as her without the silence between us being made of something brittle. There were even 2 evenings where we talked, genuinely talked, the way we used to, about work, about Owen, about a neighborhood thing happening on the street, and I allowed myself, briefly, to believe that the conversation was real. But something didn't heal the way it needed to. I'd lie in bed at night. We were sharing the room again by December, at her careful request, at my uncertain agreement, and find myself tracing events backwards the way I traced structural failures at work, looking for the origin point, the stress fracture that had been there before the break. And every time I arrived at the same place, not the affair itself, but the sentence she had said on that couch. I told myself I was protecting you. Not I was wrong. Not I lost myself. Not even I stopped knowing how to reach you. Those things I could have worked with. Those things had the texture of human failure, of 2 people who had drifted and hadn't found the way back. What she had said instead was the sentence of someone who had reframed her own choices into a kindness. She had maintained a deception for months and then dressed it in the language of care. And in those quiet night hours, I came to understand that I didn't trust her telling of anything anymore. Not because she was still lying. I believed she had stopped. But because I no longer believed she had a reliable sense of her own narrative. She told herself stories. Functional, protective stories. And she believed them. I couldn't build anything on that. In February, I told Dr. Reyes what I'd realized. Claire was in the room. The therapist asked me to say it directly to Claire, and I did. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "I believe this wasn't calculated. I believe you loved me in your way. But I don't trust the way you understand yourself. And I don't know how to be married to someone I don't trust to know themselves." Claire looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then she nodded, and it was the saddest nod I have ever seen. Not performance, not appeal, just someone receiving something true. We filed in April. The process was quiet, as these things go. Claire moved into an apartment 20 minutes away, near enough for Owen's school schedule to stay intact. We made that work, all of it, with a kind of exhausted cooperation that I think we both recognized as the last useful thing we could do together as a unit. Owen knew, not everything, but the essential shape of it, that Mom and Dad were not going to be married anymore, that this was not his fault, that both of us would be there. He received that information with 8-year-old gravity and asked 3 practical questions. Where would the dog sleep? Could he still have his birthday party? Would Dad still come to soccer? And we answered each one. He cried once, alone in his room that I knew about. I sat outside his door and didn't knock. Some things need to be felt through, and the worst thing you can do is interrupt them. Marcus and Jess had separated in November. I'd heard that through a mutual acquaintance, not through Claire. Whatever Jess and I had experienced together through this, a strange, parallel unraveling, we had not become close. We texted occasionally. Once she wrote, "I'm sorry I waited as long as I did." I wrote back, "Me too. But you called." She never replied to that, and I think she didn't need to. One evening in May, about 3 weeks after the divorce was final, I was putting Owen to bed, and he said, out of nowhere, in the matter-of-fact way children have when they're releasing something they've been holding, "Dad?" I heard Mom on the phone that time. In the car. "I know," I said. "Did that matter?" "Yeah," I said. "It did." He thought about that. I didn't tell her I heard. "I know. Was that bad?" "No," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." He turned onto his side and was quiet. Then, "She came to my soccer game yesterday." "I know she did." "She looked sad when she left." "She probably was," I said. "Are you sad?" I turned off the lamp. "Sometimes," I said. "Less than I was." He seemed to accept that. I sat on the edge of his bed until his breathing slowed. In the particular darkness of a child's room that feels separate from the rest of the world, smaller, safer, with rules of its own. There had been a week in March when Claire had asked, once, whether it was entirely over, whether I had fully decided. She didn't plead. She wasn't theatrical about it. She asked the way someone asks when they already know the answer but need to hear it said. I told her yes. It was over. She came to me once more, in April, a few days before the filing. She stood at the door of the house she had already half moved out of, and she looked at me in the hallway light, and she said, "I know I lost the right to ask for anything, but I want you to know that what we had was real to me. All of it." I believed her. I still believe her. Love can be real and the damage can be irreparable. Those two things are not in contradiction. "I know it was," I said. She left, and I closed the door. Not with anger. Not even with particular sorrow in that specific moment. Just firmly. The way you close something that has come to its proper end. The coffee maker still runs at 6:47 every morning. Owen comes downstairs in his pajamas and tells me things about weather systems and soccer, and whatever he's currently decided is the most important subject in the world. The house makes its sounds at night. The structure holds. Some things stay. Some things go. The hardest part, I've learned, is knowing the difference before you've lost too much to recover from the telling. There's a particular kind of collapse that doesn't announce itself. No sudden fracture, no obvious moment of crisis. Just a slow, incremental divergence between what two people need and what they're actually offering each other. That divergence is what sits at the heart of this story, underneath all the betrayal and discovery and late-night phone calls. What Claire did was unambiguously a choice, but it wasn't born from nothing. It emerged from a marriage that had been slowly trading depth for function, where affection had been replaced by coordination, where emotional presence had given way to reliable logistics. Daniel was a man who confused consistency with connection. He built his marriage the way he built bridges, solid, dependable, load-bearing. What he didn't account for was that his wife was not looking for infrastructure. She was looking to be known. That's not an excuse. Let's be direct about that. The hunger for being understood is human and legitimate, but the response to it, the choice to seek that understanding in her best friend's husband, carried a specific cruelty. Not just the betrayal of Daniel, but the betrayal of Jess. Two people destroyed in one quiet act of self-permission. Claire had a version of herself she needed to protect, the competent, caring, unimpeachable wife and mother, and the affair was the secret space where that self-image didn't apply. The tragedy is not that she needed more than she was getting. The tragedy is the method she chose to get it. Daniel's own role is harder to discuss without tipping into unfair apportionment of blame, but it's worth examining. He was a man built for steadiness who had confused being reliable with being present. He had noticed the widening distance, the phone behavior, the increased absences, his son's observation in the car, and had deployed an elaborate, almost professional system of non-seeing. That is not naive. That is a choice. He was afraid, specifically, of the cost of knowing. And that fear cost him far more than the knowledge would have. The most revealing moment in the entire story is not the confrontation, not the confession, not the 2 in the morning phone call. It's the quiet evening Daniel sat outside Owen's closed bedroom door while his son cried and didn't knock. Because in that decision, to be present but not intrusive, to hold the space without collapsing it, Daniel demonstrated exactly the kind of emotional attunement his marriage had been missing. He had it. He just hadn't known where to direct it. Forgiveness, as it appears in this story, is not a moral failure when it doesn't take hold. Daniel tried, genuinely, without theater, and found that the obstacle was not the act of betrayal itself, but the architecture of the person who had committed it. When Claire said, "I told myself I was protecting you," she inadvertently revealed something more damaging than the affair, that she was a person whose internal narrative could transform damage into care, and believe it. You can survive a partner who made a terrible choice. It's much harder to rebuild trust with someone who cannot be relied upon to narrate their own choices honestly, even to themselves. What this story ultimately traces is the difference between a wound and a fracture. A wound can heal. A fracture changes the composition of what it moves through. Daniel did not leave his marriage because he was unwilling to forgive. He left because the thing he would have been forgiving, the specific texture of his wife's relationship to her own truth, was not something that could be repaired through effort and time. Some damage is structural. He knew how to recognize that. He'd spent his career learning to. What stays with me about this story isn't the affair itself. Affairs happen, painfully, destructively, but they happen, and some marriages survive them. What's harder to move past is the particular sentence Claire spoke on that couch. "I told myself I was protecting you." Because that's the sentence that lives beyond the event. That's the thing that doesn't go away when the crying stops and the paperwork is filed. We tell ourselves stories about our choices. All of us do. The question is whether those stories are honest enough to be trusted by others, but first by ourselves. When the stories we tell stop matching the damage we cause, the people around us don't just lose faith in what we did. They lose faith in who we are. Maybe the real question isn't how do you recover from betrayal. Maybe it's how do you know, before it's too late, whether the person beside you is telling themselves the truth. Daniel found his answer. It just cost him everything he'd built to get there.